Hi, this is John, and welcome to another edition of Statistics Tell a Story. Well, a lot of exciting NFL playoff games, including the Broncos and the Bills this past Saturday, which went into overtime. And ultimately, Sean McDermott was fired, actually, probably for losing. But there was some debate as to whether or not his decision in overtime, which was to defer, had any impact on him getting fired. So, and I read a few articles, and there are, some people out there that are kind of disagreeing with McDermott in deferring, and they feel that you should take the ball and go first. And I wanted to outline the the rationale for either way. I think I did something on this a year or two ago, but I'm going to avoid the boring numbers this time for the most part, as best I can, and just kind of give you some rationale, and I'll let you decide. So some of the articles which disagreed with McDermott deferring, meaning letting the Broncos receive first, was, well, if you let them receive first and they get a second possession, then they have the first possession out of the third possession and later to score, and that gives them advantage. And that is absolutely true. And that's what happened to the Bills. The Broncos, I believe, got a field goal. The Bills got a field goal, and then the Broncos got a field goal to win the game. I think that's what happened. But I know that the Broncos scored on their third attempt. So, the coach kind of looks like, boy, man, maybe I should have gone first. However, the flip side to that is, I mean, obviously, if you know that's going to happen, then you're going to go first. Flip side to that is, so let's look at the advantages that the Bills in this case would have going second. Well, the Broncos might not have scored. They might have kicked a field goal, and they might have scored a touchdown. Now let's hone in first of all on not scoring and scoring a touchdown. And the reason I mention these two first is it actually makes field goal decision making, or perhaps not kicking a field goal, very easy. If the Broncos don't score, then the Bills know they only need a field goal, right? So, they don't need to channel Ben Johnson or Dan Campbell on 4th and 1 at the 15. If they have any trust in their field goal kicker, they're going to kick a field goal and try to win the game with a field goal. On the other end, if the Broncos get a touchdown, field goals come into play by the fact that you're not going to kick a field goal. So in both cases, it makes your decision making a little bit easy. And while if the Broncos kick a field goal, which they did, and it doesn't necessarily make your decision making easy per se on the Bills side of things, which of course they did kick a field goal, it does give them some information as to maybe whether or not they should kick a field goal or go for it in certain situations. But so anyway, so let me outline those again. The Broncos do not score. Bills know they only have to kick a field goal. Broncos get a touchdown. Bills know they have to get a touchdown. What if the Broncos get a field goal, which they did? Now, I'm sorry, did I say the Broncos get a field goal? Now the Bills, they're in a situation where they can use some game theory if they need to. So, for example, let's just say it's I don't know, 4th and 3 at the opponent 30. Well, now, whereas kicking a field goal might be the norm and what the coach would want to do, you might want to go for it here because now you can do kind of a tree diagram. If you kick a field goal and you look, by the way, let me preface this all by saying if you get to a third possession, which the Broncos did, their second possession, third possession overall, I believe that team has about a 60% chance of winning the game because the next score wins. And they're going to have the first opportunity. And then if the Bills, excuse me, don't make it, the Broncos would have a third opportunity, a fifth opportunity. So they're always going first if the Bills do not respond to win the game. And I think that's about a 60% proposition. So once the Broncos got the ball, the third possession, they have about a 60% chance of winning the game. And of course, they did win the game. All right. So let me go back to the Bills having it. Let's just say they did have it 4th and 3 at the Bronco 30. Now they can kind of do their own game theory to see what behooves them. They have this advantage where they wouldn't have had the advantage going first. So, for example, let's just say they estimate that they have a certain probability of converting, maybe it's 50% on 4th and 3. They have a certain chance of getting a touchdown or field goal. And they have a certain chance of failing and so forth. So you can do the math. Again, I'm going to spare you that. But they may do the math, and knowing that the Broncos have that big advantage with a third possession or later, the Bills are in a position to be more apt to go for it on 4th down on borderline situations. That's important. It's more important than you realize. Again, you really can kind of get muddled up in the numbers. And some of the numbers, especially we're kind of early on in this scenario. We've only had this overtime rule for a few years. It gets a little tricky, but in a way, it's almost like going last playing poker. Um, it's an advantage. It's more often than not than it's an advantage. But if you played poker, and sometimes if you're not going last, the advantage to going first is you kind of have the right of first bluff, right? All right, so the guy going first, guy or girl going first, they're all in. Well, they're the ones with the fold equity if you play poker, right? So going second, now you don't have that option of having the fold equity, right? You have a tough call. Anyway, I'm not saying it's apples to apples, but hopefully you get my gist. The fact is, McDermott wanted to go second because in all three cases, Broncos not scoring, Broncos getting a field goal, Broncos getting a touchdown, it makes the decision easier. I'm going to add another thing. Also, if the Broncos get a touchdown and the Bills come back and score a touchdown, they probably should go for two. Why? Because they want to end it there. Whereas the Broncos didn't have that advantage of knowing that, right? Broncos are going to kick an extra point. So anyway, all said and done, you probably need a computer simulation, which I was toying with the idea of playing around with, but I really didn't want to put the time into it. Somebody eventually will do that. And even then, you have to make assumptions on how good and bad the respective offenses and defenses are. So, not an easy thing to do. It's a little bit of gut feel. I would rather go second and have the advantage knowing what you have to do or what you are predisposed to do, as opposed to the other advantage, which is if it's tied after each possession, then the next score wins, and that's something to it. I'm not sure the right decision. I think it's close. I would argue for going second. It didn't work out in McDermott's favor. I'd like to see him. I hope he gets another job. I actually think he did a nice job with the Bills. And I will add this: he had some tough losses this year. You had the catch that wasn't rolled a catch, that was rolled an interception. It looked to me like the receiver had the ball and cradled it and had it, and then the ground caused the fumble, or not the fumble per se, but releasing the ball. Last year, I thought they had the Chiefs beat. There were a couple bad calls, namely Josh Allen, I thought converted on 4th down that they didn't give him. And they just had some tough losses. You go back to the Chiefs situation where I think 13 seconds left and McDermott was crucified for that. But I think a lot of coaches would have missed that. But he gets the Bills there every year. Yes, he has Josh Allen. A lot of times he doesn't have much else. But anyway, so I hope he lands maybe one of these jobs that are open right now. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next time on Statistics Tell a Story. Thank you.